relationships, authenticity, SEL. How often do we hear all these phrases, whether it's in education, business, or just outside? What it boils down to is connections. Hey everyone, Dr. Jones here with a new episode of Seeing to Lead. And this week, we talked to Miriam Campbell, and she explains to us all about connections, SEL, and developing a deep understanding of ourselves so that we can make the proper decisions and choices in the situations as they arise. One of the most important points Miriam brings up in this interview is that we are never finished developing our skills for connection. And you see, whenever we want to connect or teach people how to connect, we need to model authentic connection instead of transactional if we're going to help everyone become better at it. Along with that solid idea is what some of us may consider a little unsettling. You see, Miriam explains to us how we actually want conflict to occur so we can teach skills in the context where they're needed to be most effective. Because authentic conflict is where growth happens and shows both students and adults what support is needed and whether or not we're growing in the way we need to. I mean, think about it. Think about teaching SEL from a prepackaged curriculum and not understanding why the students don't get it. They don't get it because it's stale. It's not in the context. And as a result, it's inauthentic. And when we're being inauthentic or not modeling authenticity, we can't build connections. You're going to love this episode with Miriam Campbell. She has so much to say about this and so much advice as to how we can better serve not just our students, but ourselves. I have no doubt that you are going to find a ton of value from this show. So when you do me a favor, hit subscribe, share it, rate it, and review it so that other people can benefit just like you. So as always, I thank you for taking the time to listen and learn. But don't just take that from me. Let's hear from Miriam Campbell on Seeing to Lead.
Are you as self-aware as you could possibly be? I don't think say yes, because as dynamic human beings, spiritual components to us, we're unlimited. There's no one, you don't meet your cap. You don't meet, you're I've maxed out. Are you as thoughtful as possible? Are you as compassionate as possible? There's no one that exists that is finished.
Dr. Chris Jones here, and welcome to Seeing to Lead, a show designed to help leaders increase their ability to effectively support, engage, and empower their staff through intentional practices so that they create an environment where everyone reaches their greatest level of success. On Seeing to Lead, communication rules the day as we hear voices from both teachers and leaders in an effort to examine perspectives, highlight misunderstandings, and provide steps to ultimately bridge the gap between what teachers need and provide through thoughtful dialogue. This show is about amplifying voices, creating understanding, and providing information to help everyone continually improve. I want to personally thank you for taking the time. Now, let's get to getting better. Miriam Campbell, having her master's in speech and language pathology and a master's in social work, is a trained speech-language pathologist, social worker, author, and teacher. She empowers therapists and teachers with skills to naturally integrate social-emotional learning throughout the school day. The approach she developed, Skills for Connection, is a practical, emotional, language, and cognitive approach to transform conflicts and challenges into learning opportunities. She internationally provides teacher professional development training as well as therapist cohorts to use her Skills for Connection technique. Her book, Bubble Double, has already helped thousands of teachers and therapists introduce social skills and provides a structured, fun way to support social emotional development. She provides training and coaching for parents and professionals with a one-to-one social emotional support. I'm excited to speak with Miriam today because of her focus on the social emotional aspect for not just students, but parents as well. After all, if we're going to improve education by working as a community, we all need support as we take that journey. Miriam, welcome to Seeing to Lead.
Thank you so much for having me here, Chris. I appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. As I went through your bio, a couple of things stood out to me, and one of them was the approach for transforming conflicts and challenges into learning opportunities that I'd like to get to a little later. But first, I have to ask you, could you tell the listeners about your book, Bubble Double, and its importance to education?
Yeah, so Bubble Double was actually a gift that I experienced and learned from one of my students, because I was working with this very, very darling young boy diagnosed with autism. And I was working with him on social skills. We were working on greetings. And I did like all the things I was supposed to do. We did the role playing, we did the social stories, we acted it out, we, did the puppets, the whole thing. And at the end of the session, he left without saying goodbye. And I thought maybe I should quit the job because here I am throwing my all into it, and I thought I was doing a good job. And at the end of the session, he just left. So like, what happened here? And I realized that he didn't have any framework for understanding the work that we were doing. We were working on a lot of different social skills, but there wasn't any type of context or container for the information that we were learning. So when I was doing, skill that I thought was like, okay, obviously we're having a relationship here. So you got to tell me when you're leaving, because we have something here happening. There's a dynamic happening between the two of us, therapist and client, student. He didn't feel that he could leave without feeling that there was any like thing being like contained or not. So the idea came from that interaction. And I thought of what he needs is a visual idea that he is sort of involved in when he's connecting with another person. And I came up with the idea of a bubble double, where there's two people, sharing this sacred space of connection. And it's very visual and it's fun. And it's this way of containing all the skills that we have for connection. That's why my company is called Skills for Connection, because it has to be about connection. It can't be about, I gotta be nice to that boy so that way he wants to talk to me. Or I gotta, comply because otherwise I'm going to be rejected. Now, those things are true, but that's not what we want to be fueling our kids' social skills and to be fueling their connection skills. We want it to be coming from a place of empowerment of, I am involved in something meaningful called connection. And so Bubble Double is this visual, very fun book that goes through all the different skills for connection and helps us understand the context of it. So like we go too far away from somebody, our bubble stretches, if we're too close to somebody or we're touching somebody else, without their permission, it pops. If we want to enter somebody else's space, we have to say, hello, how are you? And to make our bubbles join and create this extra bubble around the two of us that we are now engaged in. That's the idea of Bubble Double.
That's a great visual for when you're talking about relationships and connection. I like to think of when you were talking, besides what you were saying, was my two boys used to love to play with the bubbles that you blow through the thing. And then they'd run and pop them, and sometimes they'd catch together and they'd make a double bubble. And when you were too rough with them, you could catch them if you were soft enough, but if you were too rough, they would pop. So that's a great visual. I think about when you talk about skills for connection, how when we talk to schools, educators, a lot of them say that students are now missing those social skills and that ability to connect. And they blame it on electronics. They blame it on phones. They blame it on pandemic. They blame it on a lot of things. But how do we get back to the idea of helping students learn these skills to be social, to connect in a meaningful way where they're focused on the connection with another human being instead of it being transactional, like you talked about, where I want to be nice to this person so so they talk to me, instead of just that. How about I want to be nice to this person because they're another human being and we're all connected in some way?
So that is it really comes down to leadership, and it really comes down to their models, because like everything that our students learn, like from infancy, when they learn language and they learn how to communicate, you learn that from your environment. So if your only interaction with the teacher is transactional, then they're modeling that relationships are transactional. I'll smile at you if you give me the correct answer and if you're behaving. But you as a person may or may not be worthy or meaningful or significant to me in my life that it's not worth my time. You're not worth my time. So that's reinforcing transactional relationships. Now, I'm not pointing fingers at teachers because I've been a teacher and I know that it is extremely overwhelming the amount of demands that are on a teacher. And so the way that I find is helpful for teachers to think about it is that we all of us, teachers included, can very easily get stuck in the same paradigms our students are in, and that there's no one who's finished developing their skills for connection. If you go to, a home with elderly and you ask them like, oh, are you as self-aware as possible? I'm not talking about people who are struggling with dementia or memory or things like that. But just to ask them like, are you as self-aware as you could possibly be? Like, I don't can say yes, because as like dynamic human beings, like spiritual components to us, we're unlimited. There's no one, you don't meet your cap. You're like, oh, I've maxed out. Like, oh, are you as thoughtful as possible? Are you as like compassionate as possible? Like, there's no one that exists that is finished. So when we see our students are struggling with this, I'm not even talking about like, oh, humble pie. I'm talking about like authentically recognizing I too am in this process of growth. And like when I hear about transactional relationships, I can notice where I'm having transactional relationships. And I could notice for myself, like, okay, as a teacher, how can I work on my emotional regulation? How many times parents call me or teachers call me or therapists call me and they say, help me with this child. This child is rigid thinking. Like I can't even count how many times. And I'm like, so that is a rigid statement to say, because like everything, we're works in progress. So we could say, my student is rigid about scheduling, or my student is rigid about personal space, or my student is rigid about no one, interrupting them, or my student is rigid about choosing the game. But when we think about ourselves and realizing that like we are in that same process that our students are in, or that our children are in, then it gives us a paradigm shift of us being able to engage in the process. And when we're engaged in the process, then we can model the process. So when I, as a teacher, am feeling overwhelmed by what's happening in my classroom, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose it. That child does that one more time. Recognizing like, oh, I'm struggling with my emotional regulation. I'm a human being. It's okay for me to struggle with emotional regulation, but that doesn't mean that I want to yell. So like allowing myself to process my emotions and remain as a self, as a leader, as a self, then will enable me and empower me to help my student because they will see it. I could even say something to my students like, I need to take a deep breath because there's a lot of things happening in the classroom. Teachers feel very scared to do that because I'm supposed to be in the position of leadership. I don't want to show any weakness or any imperfection. But somebody who is blowing up, a teacher that's yelling, is also showing their weakness. That really is. That's showing I'm on the same level as you and I'm collapsing here, because of the antics that you guys are performing in the classroom. But if I am a self and I'm a teacher and I'm a leadership and I'm taking responsibility for my emotional process, I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to take a deep breath and then you can continue leading. Now, you could say this out loud or you could do it internally. Either way, the students are watching this transformation. They know usually before us when we're about to lose it because they have their antennas up, and we may or may not be aware of that. But for their survival, they need to know when the teachers, I'm sorry, I'm just getting over COVID, about to lose it. So they are highly attuned to us. So when we in leadership role, when we are in that position and we are able to model what we want our students to be doing because we see ourselves in that process of growth, that's how we teach these skills. There isn't another way because relationship skills are taught through relationships. You can't a child, especially who doesn't have prefrontal cortex, development completed, is not going to be able to abstractly infer, okay, so that idea, let me put that into this situation. That's not really how we learn about relationships. We learn about relationships by being in relationships or seeing from relationships what we don't want to do. Either way, but it's the real life interaction. So that's how we do it. That's how we teach the skills. There is no shortcut.
So first of all, you said a whole lot there. So I just want to unpack some of it. You were you're talking about the idea of rigidity and how skills for connection are never done being developed, because as human beings, we're unlimited. We can continue to develop in all types of areas of our life. And I think to myself that when you said my student is rigid, and that being a rigid statement in itself, and then and I started to think about different things I'm rigid about and different things that teachers that I work with are rigid about. And how by pointing that out, and here's my question, by pointing that out, I can see that helping with supporting teachers in developing relationships and helping students develop authentic relationships or get practice in these relationships by supporting them in shifting that paradigm from being rigid. Is there a way to do that? Is there a preferred way to do that?
That's a very good question. I've actually been thinking about this topic a lot. I took a course by the ADHD dude. Many of you may have heard of him. And he was talking about people think that, if their child is very rigid, then okay, I'll just be flexible. And he was saying that reinforces rigidity, because then they don't need to practice flexibility because they are, I've been blinking on the word, but like they're being catered to. So like they don't need to overcome a challenge of their struggle of being rigid and needing to be this way, because they never have to. Everyone else around in the world is being flexible for them to be able to continue in their rigid motion. That's what he said. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I also think that there's something in relationships where we model the thing that we want to see. So I think they're both true. So I don't think that there's like, this is the way or that is the way. I think it's a matter of really, as we're talking about the teacher self or the leader self, having a very deep knowledge of what's happening inside of themselves to be able to choose what is right in each moment. So like, if I am going to always compensate by being rigid because I want to make sure that my student's able to not have to be rigid, and it's coming from a place of rigidity, then I need to know that for myself. If it's coming from a place of flexibility, I need to know that for myself. It doesn't, and what the student needs each time, I wouldn't make a black and white statement of you should always do it this way, you should always do it this way. I think these are both things to keep in mind when you're engaging with a student who struggles with rigidity. And what I say, what I teach, in my trainings and my courses, what I teach is we can develop flexible thinking by throughout our life processing that. So like what that looks like is trying to come up with at least 3 alternatives to any situation. So like for parents, I'll tell them like, if you're about to park and you're like, oh my gosh, there's no parking spots, honey, do you have any ideas, to talk to your child, like of what I could do? Like, can you come up with 3 different ideas, or what should I make for dinner? Do you have 3 ideas of what we can make for dinner? And it becomes part of the way the child thinks is flexible. Like then that is really how to develop it. I don't know in each situation if you should say like, okay, in this situation, I'm going to stand up against them so they develop malleability and flexibility or not. But I would say in general, if you're trying to promote something and you're trying to build something, then you could find bazillion opportunities to talk about flexibility. Okay, so, we've been doing this math first and then science next. I'm curious if anyone has any ideas of schedule changes that might be possible. And of course, like they'll say, well, let's do recess all day. Okay, so let's write that idea on the board. Write that one on the board so that way they don't have to say it 10 times.
Yeah.
So you can analyze it, whether or not that's a good idea. But put it down as an option. Okay, what else? What's another option? Okay, so today we'll do, social studies first. And then we'll do, okay, what else is a good option? And even just having the discussion with flexibility is meaning of actually practicing. You're not talking about it as a theory. You can talk about it, and that's also helpful of like, wow, you just grew your flexibility. But really being able to practice it in real life, that's really what it's about. Like I was saying about relationships. We learn about relationships through relationships. We practice flexibility through practicing flexibility. So that's really I think the research shows at least 3 different alternatives to any type of situation is the way that we practice that skill.
And I understand what you're saying, and I want to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying and saying it back right. But when you're talking about whether to be flexible or rigid, just using this for an example, because there's different fields that you could talk about, but it's not a this or that, it's a this and that. So instead of or, it's and it's a dance based on the context that you find yourself in. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes. I would say that as far as engaging with the student who is in a conflict with flexibility, and then, to teach them the skill is at separate times is just talking about it. And then when you see they're really proficient, they are emotionally regulated, and it's not like what they feel like is, their life is on the line because whether or not they're going to play soccer during recess or not soccer during recess, and they're highly, emotionally aroused during that time. Once they have the cognitive skill like that, it's like almost easy for them. That's the type of thing you could be like, okay, well, do you have any alternative ideas? Perhaps. Can you come up with 3? And then especially if it's something that is like reinforced as being like, whoa, you can come up with 3 skills. That means you are developing flexible thinking. They can develop that emotional pride with it. And it becomes less of a conflict of me versus you. And this is a power struggle. It's about I am the teacher trying to guide you and help you develop this lifelong skill of flexible thinking. And we are all on the same page of that's what's happening here. This isn't personal. This is about you developing this skill and me being your guide and support.
Supporting your teachers and students seems to be a struggle. They just don't seem to be engaged. You wish they would take more responsibility for their learning and culture of the building, but they just don't seem to be empowered enough to do it. So, my question is, have you checked out the book Seeing to Lead yet? It's all about creating a true educational experience where learning, growth, leadership, and community take center stage. Full of strategies and resources, Seeing to Lead is about attaining that goal by employing a model that supports, engages, and empowers all individuals to become leaders themselves. Pick up a copy today at seeingtolead.com. That's seeingtolead.com. Remember, you don't become a leader and then decide you need to support and recognize others more than yourself. It is the moment you realize it's about supporting and recognizing others that you become a leader. Seeingtolead.com. I'm really glad that you took the conversation there and explained that, because when you first started talking about whether we should be rigid or flexible against rigidity, I instantly wanted to go into the avenue of your work around turning challenges and conflicts into learning opportunities. Did you just basically walk us through that? It seems like this is what you're talking about.
That's what it looks like. Yes. Yeah. It's almost like we want those conflicts because without those, I used to work with kids directly one-on-one in a therapy session. And, I could get whatever I could get done in therapy session. But as I started learning more, and as I was saying, I had many times during, my profession that I was like, maybe I should not be doing this work because maybe it doesn't work. That was another moment where I was working one-on-one with kids and I was realizing they're regulated with me in a therapy session. So, and they're children. So I could do play therapy, but how far can I really get when they are they're not being stimulated. There's no conflict. Even if I bring another student in and I try and contrive a situation, how authentic is that going to be when they have an adult there that's supporting them and present and who they feel empathically, and it really brought me to the understanding that they need someone in real time to coach them. And if the teachers and then if the parents know how to take those conflicts, then those conflicts are that is where the growth happens. That's where the movement happens. When I see the students struggling, when I see the kids struggling, that's the moment where I see oh, this is it. This is it. Meaning, this is it. Could be many things. This is it. Could be okay, so this is where I see they need more support. Or this is where I see I need to remove a situation in advance. Or this is it, as in this is the discussion that we're going to have later. Because right now they're not available emotionally to have this discussion. And right now it's a matter of their safety and other people's safety. But this is the space where we're going to be able to discuss, well, what were you thinking in that space? And what were you feeling in that space? And what did you want to say in that space? You were so upset, you just hit. What did you want to say in that space? Where they have an opportunity to sort of practice it of their real life situation. I'm not reading some contrived, curriculum book. of like, oh, Harry and Sam were sitting at the lunch bench, and they were holding their iPad, and like, who knows if any of these kids in this school, the specific school, have iPads, or if any of the kids in the school's names are Sam and Harry, like maybe they're all one, and who knows? I'm saying like when we're using and we're stuck to curriculum books that are teaching social emotional lessons, then we're going to be missing the mark for actually what our kids' struggles are. But if we look at their conflicts and we're engaged with them and present with them in their struggles, then we'll have our finger on the pulse and we'll know exactly this is what this child needs. And if I know what the challenge is and I have the skills as a teacher, can guide them. And now this behavior that just threw the whole class out of whack now became a learning opportunity because they need to learn the skill. What do I do when there's somebody who is bothering me and bothering the whole class? How do you deal with that? What does that look like? How do I stay safe, feel safe inside internally? How do I process my emotions? How do I problem solve? How do I communicate? How do I have a persuasion type of conversation or type negotiation type of thing?
You just said a wonderful thing that I think may have sent some people back. It lit me up when you said it. The idea of, and I'm going to clumsily paraphrase it, so feel free to jump on me if you want. Textbook, if we're teaching SEL things, and these social skills from books, textbooks, and so forth, we're getting it wrong. We're missing the mark because we actually want these conflicts to occur. So that's where the learning can occur. That's where we can jump in. Did I hear that right?
Yes. And I'll tell you why it's so significant is many of our kids who are struggling. I mean, everyone struggles in developing, as I already said, like there's no one that's free, even if no one has, but many of our kids are struggling, have diagnosis ADHD, or ASD or things like that. Now, if you teach a concept in a book and you have ADHD, then one of the challenges of ADHD is future thinking. And if you're going to say like, okay, well, I taught them in the book. Now, how come the behavior isn't generalizing and they're not doing it in the classroom when they have a struggle, with their peer during recess or during lunchtime? Now, that means you don't really understand this child's struggle, because if they could have future thinking, then they wouldn't struggle in this area. But that's why they need real life support of somebody guiding them. So to read it in a book, or one of the core challenges of ASD or someone on the spectrum is inferencing. So that's a different challenge that's causing could be a very similar behavior. But that same skill of like, okay, so that's what Sam and Harry did with their iPads. Oh, this is the moment. No one's telling them this is the moment. They need somebody there who can actually say, this is the moment. Now, I can't even tell you like how many parents call me. My child is 22 years old. I'm talking about even kids that were able to stay in the school system, until before they aged out. But, and they say like, can you work with my child? They can't really work with their child at that point because there's no outside person there to guide them. If they have a job, hopefully, if they're able to get, employment, hopefully, their boss isn't taking the time to be their social skills coach. Not the dynamic. That's not the last time they have that, aside from their parents, is really in the school system. And there isn't really another option. So on one hand, I'm acutely aware that the teachers have, 30 kids in the classroom very often. And there's no way on earth that they can navigate every single student and have, as much as we talk about having an individual plan for each student, that's impossible. We have 30 students, you're one human being. Your brain can focus on one thing at a time. Like that's how many synapses we have. Like it's not physically possible to be able to do that. But what is physically possible is as a teacher, to learn certain patterns of the way that we process emotion, the way that we process problem solving, the way that we process communication, self-awareness, developing things like that. And we can talk using those paradigms, using these, I call them skill constructs that I teach. And with those skill constructs, everything I'm teaching will be providing support for these students. So all day long, instead of their half-hour mandate that they get, all day long, they're learning social studies with the concept of perspective taking. And they're learning about reading their literature novel, and they're learning about it with the concept of self-awareness and how do we identify people's feelings and how do we identify people's perspectives and what solutions could he come up with And what's the flexible thinking that he could have as supporting his reading in this literature exercise? Now, from that context, the world is open to teachers because you don't have to prepare more for that. It just becomes your way of processing anything we're doing. When I'm talking to the students, like, oh, we're totally out of, all the board markers are dried out. Anyone have any ideas? Let's see if we can come up with 3 ideas of what we can do alternatively. Okay. And we're out of electricity. What can we do? We have a conflict right now because we only have 6 photocopies of this worksheet. Does anyone have any ideas of what we can do? These are all flexible thinking ideas, but that's how you use flexible thinking throughout your school day. We talk about self-awareness. Okay. So I see from your perspective, this worksheet looks like it's like so easy for you. You just sat down and you started working. From your perspective, or from your, I see that your brow is furrowed. You're totally focused. Like, that's incredible focus that you have. You've just brought self-awareness to this child. You're using the same construct to teach every student the skills that they need, but you're doing it throughout the day. They're not being removed from the classroom. It's in the day. It's built in. That's how I would love everyone to be teaching social emotional learning.
Clearly that just sitting here, that sounds phenomenal. But it begs another question from me. And it also gives me pause and maybe a little bit of a fear that if I lay those out, I'll let you have it those, because you seem to be leaning into all of that anyways. So the teacher piece and how the teachers need to do this. But now I think about the teachers being trained to do this so that they change their behaviors to do this. Is it enough to have the teachers attend PD to do this, or do they need to be supported in the moment in a classroom? Which is what I'm wondering about, to make it meaningful or to make it so it takes with them. And then being the principal of a high school, I think about the 9th through 12th graders, where I have the whole gamut from students that have these skills that employ them each day and students that don't and that are sorely in need of them. Is there an age where these work better, or they're more effective or easier, dare I say, to impart? So teachers, students, age, go ahead.
Okay. So as far as teachers, the only schools that have ever successfully implemented this are schools where they have follow-up, where the teachers are being supported and it becomes part of the school culture. It changes the school culture when I am a person and I'm allowed to make mistakes, because then I can go to the teacher's room and say like, oh my gosh, I totally lost it with my students today. And no one's going to be like, oh, judgment upon thee. You have like, how could you? You terrible person, but if growth is part of the way we view schooling, then as teachers, we can see ourselves in the process and we don't have to be perfect. So the carryover for schools that are doing this with the teachers that are doing this, it becomes part of the way we talk. Like, oh, like I see, one of the constructs of teachers, like I see, I think, I feel, I choose. Like, I see you holding 2 coffees and I'm thinking that you got me one of them and I'm feeling all excited. And I just wanted to ask you, did you make sure to put sugar in it? And the other teacher might say like, from your perspective, you thought that I brought this coffee for you. From my perspective, I didn't get any sleep and I'm drinking both of them.
Yeah.
It could become like real, like schools that are really implementing this, it becomes part of the language. Now, the second question, and this is really what what it's getting to, is how chewy is it? How awkward is it? That can we actually implement this with high school students or students that are not struggling? And will they be able to handle this and hear it? So it's definitely easier with younger kids because younger kids don't know what's normal.
Right. And they'll buy it and have fun. Yeah.
So if they're talking like this and you're using this way of talking, then like that, they'll accept the reality that they're faced with, That being said, you can in your own mind use the skill construct without spelling it out. Meaning you don't have to say, from my perspective, blah, blah, blah. And from your perspective, blah, blah, blah. You could just say your perspective and their perspective, which is how a conversation usually goes. I see that you're really upset at me because I was running 10 minutes late. I was also feeling so overwhelmed when I was trying to find parking and I could not find it. So that's a self and other. You just saw the other person, you saw yourself, you're communicating using that, but you didn't say any of the weird stuff. It doesn't sound so weird. But the more natural it is, the more that it's integrated, the more that it's used. Now, if we had the luxury to give every teacher, an opportunity to do internal process and do their own therapy and do their own work, they would probably naturally talk like this. Now, I don't mean like they would naturally say, I see, I think, I feel, I choose, but they would naturally have enough of a self that they could see another. Now, we don't always have that luxury ever, really, in the school system. So it's sort of like we're sort of, okay, so if we don't have the luxury of giving every person individualized therapy to be able to process themselves and to know who they are and to understand how the world works and realize that it's not personal when the student, sasses back. It's about the student and their struggles and who do I want to be as a teacher, even when this, student is acting, inappropriately or rudely or, following the rules. This isn't a personal attack. This isn't a me thing. So the more that we have that actual internal process, the less that we have to use, contrived formats or contrived constructs until we have that luxury, and people do their own work independently. Then there really are like sort of structures that we can use to shortcut. So I'm not there totally, but I still have a venue that I could, pinch it with and be able to provide support for my students and provide support for myself. So just to more clearly answer your last question, the more natural it is, the more easily it is for anybody to hear it, especially high schoolers who have their guard up anyways. But we still can do it and just be, like anything, be smart about it.
Well, thank you for answering that. You just have so much information and you're so genuine about it and steeped in it. I could talk to you all day. However, we're getting near the end of the podcast. So we may have to talk about another visit, because this is just such a topic that I think is so important for schools as we discuss mental health and SEL to make sure that we're doing it right. Because it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to attempt it. And it's another thing to actually get it right to where it sticks. So thank you for that. But I have two questions for you that I ask everybody at the end of every podcast. And the first one is, if you were not in education or an educator, what would you be?
I hope a growing student, a growing person. That's what I would hope. And I hope that even within my education, I'm also that. But if I had to not be providing for others, I hope I would continue to stay in the role of growing.
Why does that answer not surprise me one bit?
Pretty much what we've been talking about the whole time.
So, you've said a lot, and I'm sure you could say a lot more, but what's the most important piece of advice you would give to leaders as they work to better support, engage, and empower those they serve?
I would say be compassionate with yourself. Because sometimes when we learn new things, we're like, how come I didn't know that? That should be obvious, or it should be easy for me. And we'll berate ourselves, and that doesn't ever get us towards growth. And that same thing that we're doing for ourselves is having that compassion on ourselves. We can offer our students and the people that we're providing support for and leading, because just like we grow with compassion, they too best supported with compassion.
Miriam, I'm sure people are going to want to hear more from you. What's the best way they can reach out and get in touch with you?
You can check out my website, skillsforconnection.com, or you could email me, skillsforconnection@gmail.com.
And I will put both of those in the show notes, so people can click them, and it's nice and easy for them to do and hit right when they're there. So thank you very much for being a guest today. I can't tell you how excited I am about a lot of the information you gave, and I want to dig into it more. So I might just be greedy and reach out to you and see if we can set something up for my own purposes. So thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's a wrap, but not the end. Next step, be sure to take action on something you heard here today. Hey, thanks for listening to the Seen to Lead podcast. If you would like to connect for any reason, email me at drchrissj@gmail.com or catch me on Twitter at Dr. C.S. Jones. If you've gotten any value from the Seen to Lead podcast today, you can help me and other leaders create a world-class environment through a teacher-centric approach by subscribing to the show, leaving an honest rating and review, and sharing this episode on social media with your most valuable takeaway. Also, one last thing. Have you had a chance to pick up my latest 5-star rated book yet? Grab your copy of Seeing to Lead anywhere you buy books or at seeingtolead.com. That's seeingtolead.com, where you can learn more and continue to improve. Now go have a successful week.